Okay, so welcome everybody. We're just going to quickly do very quick introductions of ourselves. So I'm Heatlh MacNeill. I work over at Bridgepoint Active Rehab as part of Sinai Health System, and I have an interest in educational technologies, which is why I'm here. And I co-instruct a master's level course with Kataryna through the Dalla Lana School of Public Health, and we're also making that into a fully online offering this year. So I'm going to pass it over to Kat and Jason to introduce themselves. Maybe Jason, if you could go next.
Yeah, sure. So hi, everybody. My name is Jason Liang. I'm currently a PGY4 resident. I'm the chief resident for the Division of Physical Med and Rehab, otherwise known as Physiatry. So I also have an interest in virtual teaching. So hopefully throughout the next hour and a half, I'll be able to give all of you some sort of resident perspective on some tips and tricks that we can use.
Hi everyone, I'm Kataryna Nemethy. I'm an e-learning developer and instructional designer at Baycrest Health Sciences. I've been at this for over 10 years, so I have an interest in educational technologies, and as Heather said, I co-instruct the course at U of T. And I'll just get started. I'll be moderating the chat more so than anything, so this is just my chance to say hi and put a face to my name. And Heather and Jason are going to be speaking about best practices, and what you see on screen now is one of them. So one of the first things you want to do when you are in a virtual webinar or class is set some ground rules for how you expect people to interact. So Heather did mention that this is a bit of a test. We were running this with usually 20 to 30 participants, and now, well, we're around 30, but we were maybe expecting up to 60. So originally we thought we'd ask you to have your videos off. But since we're at a reasonable number, as much as possible, if you can keep your videos on, it changes the dynamic. But keep your mics off. And Heather will point out explicitly when she'll ask you to turn your mics on. And again, I'll be moderating the chat. So any technical questions, I'll try to answer them as best as I can there. And that's it. Thank you.
Okay, and this screen is just to point out that all of you might be attending from lots of different devices. Some of you might be on an iPad or your phone or a desktop. So all of these features are there somewhere, but they're all kind of in different locations. So this is just to show you where they might be hidden. And I just want to say also that I'm really lucky to be presenting here with Jason and Kataryna. They bring to this talk a wealth full of knowledge. And I'd highly recommend whenever you're doing a synchronous presentation that you try and do a co-facilitation model. It's really hard to manage the content and the group dynamics and the tech all together. So if you can really do a tag team, that would be best practices. Sometimes that's easier said than done, but sometimes you can get a volunteer in the audience or maybe one of the residents that you're teaching who feels really tech savvy. So that's a great way to engage everyone too. So even though I'll be the one doing most of the talking here, it's really a tag team approach with all of us. Okay, the other thing when you are co-facilitating is just having a back channel communication. You can private chat within the chat to your co-facilitators, but you never know when you might accidentally hit everyone, so you might want to use WhatsApp or texting in the background to communicate with your co-facilitators. So COVID certainly has created a new market for virtual teaching in this new normal. And obviously, when we look at face-to-face teaching, successful practices would incorporate things like interactivity, repetition, practice, feedback, social learning. And when you look at the literature of online learning, the exact same things are true. Makes sense, right? In fact, a lot of people are saying we really shouldn't be calling it e-learning. We should just be calling it learning because it's the same principles. And so we hope in this webinar to kind of challenge your perception of what a webinar is. I know traditionally it's thought of kind of similar to a large lecture style format with some interactivity, but maybe limited interactivity, maybe just Q&A at the end. And we want you to really get a feel for using interactive features. We figure most of you are probably teaching in small to moderate group sizes right now. Some of you might be doing lecture style as well, and it's important if you are doing lecture style that you're still incorporating things like chat, breakout rooms, back channel, Twitter, etc. But we're going to be teaching you a little bit more about the small to moderate size interactivity. So these are the objectives for today. So we hope that you get to learn a few interactive features of Zoom, recite some practical tips and learning considerations, and define some of the advantages and disadvantages to online synchronous learning. And this is the outline. So we're going to start with netiquette, which is essentially online etiquette. Talk a little bit about how online communication is different than face-to-face communication. Jason's going to go into some of the resident considerations for teaching virtually. And then we're going to do a little bit of think, pair, share and breakout rooms, talk about what we learned, and then all come back together. So I just wanted to give you a heads up. This is what my behind the scenes looks like. So in front of me, I have my computer. I can see all your smiling faces. Thank you so much, everyone who has your video on. Above that, I have a second screen attached to that computer, and that allows me to have my PowerPoint open, but as well I have the chat and the participants. And then over to my right, I have my son's computer, and he's logged in like a participant. He's the one that says, hello, everyone there. And that allows me to see what you guys are seeing, so that if I post something new, I can make sure that it's not messing up, that you guys are seeing what I want you to see. Now, having said that, you do not need 3 screens going all the time when you're doing this. You can also just use your cell phone as the participant view, but play around with these options. It's also important, we're going to be focusing in on Zoom here because a lot of people are using Zoom. We're going to be touching on some other synchronous technologies as well. But you need to go in through the back end and allow a lot of this interactivity to occur. So you can see here when I log in under settings, I have to go in and click on annotation, whiteboard, nonverbal feedback, anything that you do want to use. So it's not necessarily automatic. So we don't work for Zoom. We're not getting any royalties in Zoom. We just chose it because we had to choose something, and a lot of people seem to be using it. We've taught in pretty much all of the synchronous technologies. We used to use Adobe Connect. It's awesome. I love Adobe Connect. It is more like the Cadillac though. So it's a little more glitchy, a little steeper of a learning curve, but you get to use a lot more features too. And we've also taught in Blackboard Collaborate, and I wanted to mention that because that's part of Quirkus. And so we used it this past year in our master's course, and it has all the same features. It's just a little bit more on the basic side. And then Zoom is kind of somewhere in between them. So I've listed a lot of the common features there, and we're going to be going through the vast majority of them. I do want to mention as well, there's lots of other options. Anything that has the word meeting in it typically means it's mostly for a meeting, not necessarily interactive teaching. So I have GoToMeeting here and Google Meet, and these typically have video, allow slides and downloads, and have a chat feature. And then even more simplistic than that would be things like Skype, FaceTime, Google Hangouts, which I'm sure a lot of you have used. A lot of people ask me, well, what should I be using? And we've been saying, you know what have you been using during the pandemic? That's what you feel comfortable in, and that's probably the best one for you to be using. Okay, we're gonna back up and talk a little bit about disclaimers before we start getting interactive. One is that we're going to be going through a lot of interactivity online here, and don't do this. So pick 2 or 3 interactive features that you want to use. Every time you layer on a new interaction, it takes time, complexity, more chances of glitches. So yeah, don't do all the interactive features that we're doing in one talk. expect glitches. I think sometimes as teachers, we get really worried about teaching online because we want everything to be perfect. But know that things are going to glitch out. Of course, it's important to practice, to try out all these techniques ahead of time, to have multiple backup plans. But even with that, tech is going to fail you sometimes. And I think it's important for us to model that, to be, okay, this might happen, this might work, this may not work. But if we expect everything to be perfection, then our learners are going to expect everything to be perfection for them too, and they're going to be really frustrated when it doesn't work as well. So I think it's okay to be accepting, knowing that in an online environment, we get some pros of being in an online environment, but we're going to have cons, and this is one of the cons. Okay, and lastly, you have to be really explicit about netiquette online. We've all learned how to teach in a K-12 way and beyond for many of us. And when we come online, there's a different set of rules, and we have to be a lot more explicit. So here is an example of being explicit. I'd like you all to unitask during this webinar. I know that's really hard. We typically log into webinars and we're doing emails and a whole bunch of other things we have to catch up on in the background because people aren't staring directly at us. And we have a lot of things we need to get done. We're adult learners. So if you agree to unitask, I want you to go down to the participant pod. Click on that and you'll see there's a bunch of different options. I'd like you to click yes or the green check mark. And if you're having any trouble finding that, let us know in the chat. We'll work you through that as well. Lots of green check marks coming in. Thank you so much. Okay. So before we go on to the next thing, I just want you to reflect on, if we aren't interacting, why are we meeting synchronously? Why don't we just record this session, have you guys watch it at 1.25 speed? It would be a lot more quick. And then we could come back on at a later time and interact together, kind of a flipped classroom approach. So always consider when you are doing the interactivity, what size of audience you have. Are they novice? Are they beginner in terms of tech? What size you're going to have. That's going to depend on the type of interactivity that you use. So the next thing is, if anyone has ever been in a webinar where they are not where they're not doing email or something in the background, where they're just unitasking on their experience in that webinar, we'd really like to hear from you. So if that's happened, can you raise your hand? And I might call on you to speak. Okay, Mirek, perfect. We're just going to unmute you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Perfect.
Tell us a little bit about your experience, Mirek.
Of doing multiple things at once?
Yeah.
Well, I think it's very common nowadays, at least from when I do a lot of meetings online, because there are so many meetings that have come up. So it's I think in a meeting environment, it's very common to listen, and partially because I think the meetings in probably 50 to 70% are not relevant in content aside from part of the meeting. So it's very important that in order for me to concentrate on the meeting itself, it's very relevant. And the second thing that I notice is that the length of the meeting, or the conference, I guess, is very important. And the longer the meeting itself, the harder it is to stay concentrated.
Very good point. Yeah. Okay, and I see both Judith and Natasha have their hands raised. So we're going to do something a little different here. I'm going to open all three of your mics, and I'd like you to talk about your experience with being on a webinar and not multitasking. And when I open all your mics, you're going to notice that one of two things happen. Either no one wants to talk because you don't want to talk over each other, or you're going to start talking at the same time. And that's okay. What I want to highlight here is that happens every time we do this, but by the end of the webinar, people start figuring out how to turn take and doing things like putting up their hand or non-verbal things where they just start knowing when to talk. So I'm going to unmute both of you. I think you're both unmuted, so go for it, Judith and Natasha. And Mirek, feel free to jump in as well.
Hi, Natasha. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. How are you, Judith?
Good. I haven't seen you in a long time.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I mean, I haven't done a lot of online teaching, but I've been chairing meetings of large committees, 16 people. What I have found distracting is actually when someone else shares their screen. And so I find that it's a lot harder to stay connected when you can't see anyone's faces, but it's also a lot hard. It's like when you share, that's what I'm challenged with. When I can concentrate much better when I can see everybody's faces and see who's talking. Like right now, I can't see Natasha's face, so I have no idea if she wants to add something.
I totally agree, Judith. I mean, obviously at times you have to share a screen when you're doing a webinar because otherwise a lot of the participants are going to be lost. But I do think that it takes away from the interactive piece. I just want to confirm what I'm supposed to be answering here. So you're wanting us to tell you about our experience with a unitasked webinar, is that correct?
That's right, where you're not hidden in the background doing a million things, where you have to be focused and there in front of everyone.
Right. So I mean, I've experienced webinars both unitasking and multitasking, and for sure I would you know, be able to get a little bit more out of it when I'm unitasking. But I would agree with Mirek in that there are some presentations or webinars where not all of the content is relevant to me individually. And so I may tune out and need to get other things done and then kind of tune back in when I'm available. So the unitasking experience, I do find I am connected more, obviously, and I get more out of it. The question is whether it was truly relevant enough for me to spend that time. And I would say that in general, that's been the case when I've unitasked, that it was relevant enough for me to spend that time not doing anything else.
Fantastic answers. And you guys are like natural online facilitators. Judith, you said, oh, it's Judith here. I'm, how are you doing, Natasha? And really engaging each other. So love the way you did that. That just naturally happened. Okay. We're going to go back to muting you. And next disclaimer is that we are using, we're using a lot of interactivity with a large group. I would typically do this with only 20 learners. So you're going to notice that my video is a little bit more glitchy. If that's bothering people, we can shut down some of the videos. Also, when we do the interactivity, I'm going to be breaking you up so that those of you whose first name begins with an A to an N, A to an M, as in Mary, is going to be one group, and N to Z is going to be another group. So we all have the chance of doing these interactive features without jumping on top of each other, remembering that we have limited real estate on our computers. Last thing is we can do this. So I want you to go back to, you can either go back to the participant pod, or you'll notice at the bottom there's a reaction pod. And I want you to give me the thumbs up if you are willing to be gentle on yourself if something screws up, equally gentle on us when invariably something will screw up for us, and also help out your neighbor. Maybe post things in the chat or anything that you think would be helpful for them. We're in this together. Okay, so Judith did an amazing job of mirroring online etiquette. So there's a lot of things that you can discuss with your group in terms of having the online etiquette that you want to portray. Usually we say when you do come on, when you start speaking, always say, oh, hey, it's Heather here. Because especially with a lot of video cams, we don't have that echolocation. We don't necessarily know where people are coming from. Always use a headset if you can, or you can use a mic, but a mic is going to pull in everything, the dog barking, the kids running around in the background, etc. So your computer will work just fine, but it's a lot better of a sound quality using a mic. And it can be as simple as a $10 earbuds with a microphone. That's all you need. The sound quality isn't much different between a $300 and a $10 one. But what happens is if you go on YouTube and you watch YouTube with horrible video, you can usually persevere. If you start watching something with horrible audio, you are tuned out and you're usually shutting it off after 10 seconds. Same thing in these webinar environments. Audio is the king. Have your learners indicate if they're stepping away. Go to the washroom, get a coffee, whatever. There's nothing like saying, hey, Judith, what do you think about that? And then getting a blank screen. Sorry, Judith, I'm picking on you a lot. Okay. Moving on. So we're going to start with annotation. So being mindful of your neighbors, we just want you, if your name starts with an A to an M as in Mary, we want you to write down your name, or you can do whatever you want. You can draw, you can put a stamp down. So how you do this is you go up to the top of your screen. You're going to see view options. Click on that. Go down near the bottom, you'll see an option called annotate. And on there, a little bar will pop up, and yeah, perfect. That'll allow you to start drawing or stamping, or the text will allow you to write using text. You can do arrow, you can erase things, lots of fun things. Now, as you're doing this, think about ways you might incorporate this into your teaching. You might have a slide up there of the brachial plexus, and you can get learners to label that. Or you might use it as an icebreaker, have people tell you where they're from or what the temperature is like if it's all over the world. So there's a lot of different ways that you can use this annotation feature. You guys are doing a fantastic job. I love the smiley face. Okay, awesome. So I'm sorry to break up the party, but I am going to clear all of your drawings. And I have to do that, otherwise all those drawings will persist into every slide going forward. So make sure you clear everything. Okay, and we're gonna move on to the next slide. So this is just an example of how you can use background images too. So we're gonna get the rest of you annotating now. So if your first name begins with either an N to a Z, now it's your turn to put up your name or stamp or whatever you want. And you'll see here I've divided up the city, and we want you to write in your favorite part of the city. Doing things like this allows people to annotate without stepping over top of each other. You might have noticed in the last slide that when people start to write, other people might be starting to write at the same time, and they might go over top of each other. Now, for those of you wondering how to annotate, again, you go up to the top of your screen, you'll see view options, you click that, you slide down to the bottom to where it says annotate, and then you click on that to give you your annotation bar. So I see two hearts in just above, so kind of midtown. Oh, lots of stars and hearts going on. Oh, I see Robin over by Bridgepoint. That might be the Bridgepoint Robin that I know. So this is a fun way also to do icebreakers, to do a needs assessment. You could have different quadrants with, hey, what do you guys want to learn? You can also do it for introductions. So get creative. There's so many things you can do. You can also use this for quizzing, like we talked about with the brachial plexus. Okay, I think you guys have had a lot of fun here. And you guys have been really nice to your neighbors with just using the stamps instead of, you know, drawing huge things. Thank you for that. A nice use of color too, for those of you going down to the darker areas of the screen. So again, I'm going to clear all the drawings, and then I'm going to come out of annotation. So the next thing we're going to do is open a poll, and we're going to talk in a minute about when you would use polls and chat over opening everybody's microphones and letting people chat. There's pros and cons to both of these things. The other thing is I'd like to show you the back end of what my computer looks like when I do launch a poll and how to do that. So when I do this, the screen is going to go slightly fuzzy, and that's okay. We'll have to correct it in just a minute, but just so you can see it. But that brings me to the fact that when you do things online, one of the things is you have to allow a little bit more time for not only you know, forming, norming, storming as a group, doing facilitation, but also presenting the content. So you can see my toolbar up here. You might see my mouse going around. And you'll see I have the option of polls. And when I hit polls, it'll pop up a poll. And I'm going to launch this poll in a minute, but I just wanted you to see how easy that was. And after I launch the poll, I'll also have an option to broadcast those. So I'll let you guys answer that poll. And while I'm doing that, I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint slide. Okay, fantastic. A lot of great answers coming in. This also gives me a countdown, so I know how long I've let the poll stay up for. Right now, we're about 38 seconds. And it seems like things are slowing down a bit, so I'm going to end the polling, and I'm going to share the results. So you can see there that most people are interested in learning how to make online teaching interactive. Good, that was our goal, so that's fantastic. Also, best practices in online facilitation, hopefully we're modeling that. Specific features of Zoom, a little less so, and tips for teaching in a synchronous environment. Awesome. Jason's going to talk a little bit about examples of how to use synchronous technology in trainee education. And we've got a few people typing in chat, hopefully, about the other. Kat, do you see anything there?
I have to apologize. I'm multitasking, trying to answer a few chats. Can you repeat the question?
Oh, just one of the answer on polls is other. And okay. I'm just seeing maybe Natasha.
Learn how to do, yeah, I see them. Thank you for that. Learning how to do group breakout sessions in Zoom. And then specific question was, did you create the poll beforehand and before entering this meeting?
Yes, you have to. Unfortunately, that's one of the things with Zoom. Okay, great. Are people still finding the screen a little fuzzy?
No, it's okay now.
It's okay now. Okay, great. Okay. Sorry. Okay. The next thing is to think about when would texting or chatting or use of polls be preferred over just having people have their mics open and talk. So we're going to open everyone's mic now. This might be absolute chaos, but we're just going to give it a try and anyone can talk.
Everybody's being very polite. It's Mirek here.
Hi, Mirek. Thanks.
Yeah, I find it's very distracting when two people start at the same time, because two people start and then two people stop at the same time and then two people start again. And it's like a sputtering car.
Yeah. Kind of like that CNN effect, right?
Yeah.
Also, there is background noise. Someone may not be speaking, but they may be doing stuff on their desk, and that you can hear and interferes.
Thanks, Milena. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, especially working in clinical aspect, sometimes you can hear things that you really shouldn't be hearing.
It's Judith. I've had a situation where I've had echoes. So someone else's internet seems to be delayed, and so you could hear the voice echoing repeatedly, like one person is talking and then it's echoing through the whole.
Yeah, and that's really important. You'll notice we just had that with me, and that's because I have my participant computer and I forgot to mute it, even though I had the sound right off. And that'll happen, Judith, if you have more than one person participating in the same room. So if that happens, you have to make sure that one of them has their computer muted at all times. Otherwise, you'll get that reverberation. Anyone else? When would chat or text or polls be preferred over opening the mics? Okay, and I'm just going to point out here, when you're in a face-to-face way, we usually say tap your foot 5 times before you move on. In an online way, it's even longer because of text and everything. I'm just going to mute everybody. And that's because, and it's even harder because especially if you can't see their faces, you're like, is their tech not working? What's going on in the background? You feel like you're kind of on online radio, but you have to allow that even longer pause before moving on. So great answers, everybody. Thank you. Yeah, so a lot of times polls and chat are quicker than opening the mics. You can see how long that took. Also, it might be good to get shy participants to have a voice that don't feel like talking online or sharing their video. It gives them a little bit more time to reflect because they have a little bit more time to think about the answer or what they want to craft. It might decrease biases, especially, if you have, gender biases or cultural biases. It kind of helps level the playing field a little bit. And it's good for larger audiences, less bandwidth, so less chance of tech complications. You can record or reference the questions later. So lots of different reasons. Of course, talking online is also very important. So I just want you to think about how does it feel to talk online when we were talking there? For those people who talked, how was it for you? For those people who didn't talk, how did it feel? Did it feel anxiety provoking? Should I talk? Should I not talk? And then think about how this would change with even more problems with connectivity issues, group dynamics, contentious content. And how would you change your teaching style in this environment? So remember, it's not just about taking your PowerPoint and teaching in the exact same way online. You got to change it a little bit, accounting for some of those things. Okay, I'm going to let Jason.
Awesome. So when we did this session, actually, I guess a few weeks ago now, I'm sure that many of you, if not all of you, have been participating in some sort of webinar or Zoom meeting where you've had this typical sort of didactic talk. So this is just basically illustrating what we've done in our division. And I'm sure that this is something that's been translated to other departments and other divisions as well. But initially when the pandemic hit, we had to come up with creative solutions, how to fill in our typical academic half days. And I must say, I don't know if anybody else has any input in this, but our academic half-day attendance is actually at an all-time high compared to when people had to go in person. So I think, in general, people are very excited, or residents in general are very excited to and eager to attend academic half-days now, certainly where they might be multitasking in the background. But I think that as a point, to Heather's point, I think it is very important to lay out those ground rules at the beginning because we want to set up our students, our trainees, our residents for success, even if it does mean moving towards this sort of online sort of teaching environment, which I think is here to stay for the foreseeable future. So this slide basically just illustrates the setup that I like using, and by no means is it a perfect setup, but I like having actually the videos, if people have them on a side view rather than at the top. It's a personal preference, but then I also have the group chat open as well on the side. And you'll notice that if you end up putting your Zoom screen to full screen, you actually lose the chat, and it actually has to come up in a separate window. So this is the setup that I like using when I'm attending a meeting.
Okay, great. So we're not going to talk about asynchronous learning, but I just wanted to mention it. It's when data is sent and received at different rates and times. And this is kind of our typical social media, things like Twitter, but also discussion boards like Slack, or maybe doing a e-module in the background. And so there are benefits to this type of learning over synchronous learning, especially if you want time for reflection, anytime, anywhere type of learning. So it can be at any time. You can have media attachments. The disadvantages, though, are you lose both the social cues and the immediate feedback. So you might have a learner kind of go down a rabbit hole for a while before they get the feedback and be brought back to where you'd like them to focus their learning on. And this is different from synchronous learning, which is what we're doing here today, which is the data is sent and received at the same time. So the classic one is webinars. So we're going to try the whiteboard feature now. Again, it's under the share feature. So I'm going up to new share. And I'm going to click on the whiteboard feature. And when we get on the whiteboard, I want you guys to list what you feel are the disadvantages and advantages to using synchronous technology, either over face-to-face or asynchronous technology. So we're just going to write up at the top here, and maybe Kat and Jason, you can write disadvantages. Oh, here, I'll undo mine.
Should have planned that one better. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Well, I think he just demonstrated the first disadvantage.
Yeah, that's right. There we go. Oh, now there's 2 disadvantages. So what we'd like you to do is type down what are the advantages and disadvantages of synchronous learning or webinar type learning. Yep, you can ask questions and get live answers. So more interactive, the feedback is more real time. Disadvantages is it can be more challenging to engage than in a face-to-face way. And also, you know, sometimes more challenging, not only because you have their undivided attention, but also you've all probably experienced Zoom fatigue by now. It's really hard to be learning in this environment and trying to interpret all these nonverbal cues in this little postage stamp of a face. Maintaining people's attention, yeah. Okay, for the sake of time, I'm gonna move on. Oh, too many distractions. Chat, Q&A, keep abreast of everything. Yeah, interesting. It's funny when we do this when we teach about this in a face-to-face way, I often have people put blindfolds on and just start talking so they can think about what talking would be like in a synchronous way without any tech glitches. And half the class, every time, half the class loves it because they feel almost like they're meditating and they can really concentrate on whoever is speaking. The other half of the class hate it. They like to be multitasking. And I find very similar in this environment. Some people love all the different interactivity that can be going on, and and some people really just want to concentrate on one thing. Like Judith, you mentioned you really like just looking at people's video cams. Okay, so we're going back to the slides here. And these are going to be posted. So for the sake of time, I'm not going to go too in depth to them, but some of the disadvantages, I think we talked about, getting those shy or lurking participants to present, also the tech issues, and there's less flexible time. But the advantages is it's more like natural collaboration and teaching. You can have that peer pressure effect, and you can record sessions for later. I'm going to skip over this for the sake of time too, but I wanted to mention this in that you can share your video. Just make sure that you're also clicking to share your computer's audio. But I find it can be really glitchy because everybody is, their bandwidth is all different. So I find it's much better if you take the video you want to share, hopefully it's on YouTube or Vimeo or something, and you post it in the chat. Then you have everybody go out, watch the video, give you a thumbs up when they're all done it and come back, and then you can interact and share about the video. This video, if you want, Kat, if you could post it in the chat, it's just showing the idea of focus group through a funny Snickers commercial. Okay, so this is screen sharing. You guys might have, I'm not sure if you saw this, but whenever I want to share something like a whiteboard and I hit share my screen, so you guys also have a share screen feature at the bottom, but it's disabled right now. I have all these options. So this was Kat's screen about whiteboard, or I can share my PowerPoint, or I can share my whole screen, or I can just share Google. Lots of different options within Zoom. And so just to summarize, in ambiguity, if you don't let learners know what you want them to do, they'll do nothing. So make sure you're very explicit with the netiquette and what you want them doing. Model and teach how to communicate, encourage frequent interactivity, have a co-facilitation strategy if possible, and adjust your teaching methods. And I'm going to turn it over to Jason. And what I'm going to do is I have a remote control button. I'm going to hit that. I'm going to give Jason full control. I'm then going to, sorry, just going to clear all the drawings. Perfect. Okay, great.
I have full control. Thank you. Okay, so thank you very much. So for those of you who weren't here for the introduction, I'm Jason. I'm a fourth-year resident here in physiatry here at U of T. So I'm just going to give you a few practical tips in terms of what I've personally learned through virtual teaching, particularly in our program, and a little bit beyond as well. And hopefully that'll give all of us some ideas that we can bring forth to our own institutions, practices, hospitals, wherever you work. And excellent. So this first slide, I want to give you some more practical tips in the coming slides, but I first just want to briefly start by sharing a diagram that when the whole COVID-19 pandemic hit, they posted this in the Canadian Society of Physician Leaders. And essentially what it illustrates is that sometimes in times like these, it's really difficult to get out of our, ooh, there's a rectangle that showed up there. It's really difficult to sometimes expand our circle of influence. We like to revert to what's comfortable. Certainly I do that all the time. But I think that what I've learned through this pandemic, or one of the things I've learned, is that we have, our locus of control is likely a lot larger than we initially perceived. And I think learners, trainees, and students in general actually appreciate it quite a bit if we kind of take that plunge and try to use virtual means to make our teaching sessions and our education a little bit more interactive, as opposed to keeping it just strictly didactic. So through this proactive lens, I found it actually quite helpful when I'm personally creating my own PowerPoint presentations to present to small to moderate size groups. Not advancing. Oh, there we go. Just a little bit of a lag. So some synchronous academic half-day ideas to get you started, perhaps. So certainly through Zoom, there are several interactive features that we've gone through today, some of them, and we're going to test out breakout rooms in a second. But essentially what breakout rooms are, and you probably are familiar with them already, some of you, is that you can break individuals up into separate rooms within the same meeting for a dedicated amount of time, and then you can bring them back together. So if we extrapolate that idea, I think that we can use that idea quite a bit when we're using it to teach trainees. So whether or not that means breaking people up into a junior and a senior resident group for 5 minutes to answer a separate question and then coming back together to the larger group. Certainly you can practice physical exams in pairs. I mean, teaching a physical examination over virtual means is a whole nother talk by itself, but certainly it's possible. Whether we can also simulate an OSCE scenario. So whether that be a simulated history taking group rounds where you have maybe 3 or 4 residents interviewing one standardized patient, or you can have it one-on-one, certainly, but that would require obviously more breakout rooms. We've explored a little bit about the whiteboard feature that we've used today as well. Certainly being in physiatry, we have, I've provided some examples of some neuromuscular things that we could potentially do, but really the world is your oyster in terms of what you want to use the whiteboard feature for. So whether or not that be some sort of fill in the blank, a chart, drawing peripheral nerves, branches, spinal cord tracts, Something that I've found quite helpful is that if you're the one that's facilitating the teaching session, although, you know, a lot of devices these days are touchscreen compatible, but if it's not, you can actually launch the whiteboard feature on your phone or your iPad as well. You just have to make sure that it's updated. And once you do that, it can become a little bit less awkward rather than like having your finger near the camera all the time. So you can facilitate a whiteboard sort of teaching session with your students in that way by having two devices going simultaneously. Certainly, if you're giving a more of a larger group talk, starting each subsection with a poll that you can launch through Zoom is quite useful to stimulate thought. And nothing is really stopping us from doing a flipped classroom model like we would normally do in an in-person session as well. Excellent. So you might be asking what makes a successful virtual learner, and really this slide is not meant to be groundbreaking by any means, but I think that as learners and residents, a part of it is it's our responsibility to make sure that we set ourselves up for success. And residents who really get the most out of virtual learning are those who are persistent, willing to tolerate technical problems, have effective time management skills, and really just have basic technical skills. So I think there's the thought out there that the younger generation is a lot more tech savvy, but I'll tell you right now that I think that the older generation really is quite tech savvy, almost just as tech savvy as the younger generation. And really, the more that we do it, the more we learn. So this whole process really takes a lot of trial and error in order to optimize our proficiency, both from a presenter standpoint and both from a learner standpoint as well. So practically speaking, what am I talking about? Well, I think that it's useful sometimes to just put it on a slide. So don't forget the obvious things like logging in early, avoiding distractions, sitting in a comfortable but not overly comfortable place. And it's important, we've done a lot of that, you know, no matter how many times you practice, it's okay that you need a minute to work out technical glitches, because there will always be technical glitches no matter how many times that you've tried to prepare yourself. Typically, it's also quite useful, I find, to prepare and post an agenda or an outline or referring back to it, because you can sometimes lose people through virtual means, especially because, like it was pointed out before, you can't see people's faces. So it's difficult to gauge the room, see how people feel about what you're talking about. So signposting and giving an outline helps to reorient people sometimes as well. And holding a dress rehearsal, and we're going to talk a little bit more about engaging people often, especially in a larger group. So what might residents desire as virtual learners? And a lot of this, as Heather already mentioned at the very beginning, at the outset, it's really no different than the principles that guide our teaching in an in-person setting. So anytime we're doing teaching in a virtual environment, it is useful to spend at least a few minutes at the outset to lay out the ground rules, set expectations, tell participants what Zoom features you're going to be using so that they'll be prepared. So if you're going to be launching polls, tell them that there are going to be polls coming up throughout the session. And a reminder always to minimize distractions. No matter what way you decide to make learning fun and engaging, it's through polls, quizzes, or gamification. These are always a good ways to make it a little bit more, make things stick a little bit more for trainees. Trainees in general like narrative structure where it's possible and making learning experiential. And of course, repetition is central to our learning as well. Collaborative learning is a big thing nowadays, and I think that we can achieve that through breakout rooms, which we'll go through in a second. And I'd just like to remind everybody that I think it's important to take frequent breaks. So even virtually, you know, I think it's important for even 5-10 minutes every hour, every half an hour to allow trainees to stretch, get a coffee. It just allows everybody to reset a little bit. There is such a thing as Zoom fatigue. I don't know if you guys have read about that in the news recently. Okay, great. So I'm not sure how many of you have heard about Carolyn Kinsey Goman, but she's essentially an international keynote speaker from Berkeley. And she argues that we make 11 crucial decisions about each other subconsciously within the first 7 seconds of seeing each other. So you can either be very optimistic or pessimistic about this, but personally, I think that this list that I'm going to outline in a second is quite informative, and it's really a good reminder for us when you're teaching your peers or your colleagues really the nonverbal aspects of ourselves when we're trying to speak to an audience. And you could even argue that the nonverbal aspects of how we present ourselves are even more important because we can usually only see each other from the waist up, and we can't gauge the room, and people can't see your entire body, they only can see your face. So the first point is to keep laser focused eye contact. So sometimes it's a little bit difficult depending on your camera angle, but the moment that you sort of look away from the screen, it almost seems like you're just interested. Dress for success, at least from from the bottom up. Sometimes it's quite useful to take 5 deep breaths prior to the start of your presentation. There is some evidence out there that suggests that deepening your voice makes you sound a little bit more confident. So the way that she argues that you can do this is to say hum, ahum 5 times before the start of your presentation, not during. And then of course, things like straightening your posture, making sure your head's not tilted. And showing your palms and using the right gestures. So I think it's been traditionally thought that sometimes it's a little bit distracting if we use our hands too much. But I think that it is useful sometimes to back up from the camera a little bit and to show your palms to illustrate a point, especially when you're on camera. It is still quite useful, and I think that it's something that we can do instead of projecting the camera directly on our face where we can't see your hands or on the screen at all. And remember to smile, but not too much. So many of you might be familiar with these already, but they're Zoom shortcuts, and I find them incredibly helpful, especially when I'm a participant. So this will be available to you for your reference later on as well. But these are just some of the ones that I found that are quite helpful, including things like Alt-A if you're on a PC to mute and unmute your audio instead of having to use the mouse to click the button all the time. Alt-Shift-T to take a screenshot, things to hide the participant panel and the chat. As you familiarize more with this list, it'll take a little bit of trial and error to kind of see what works for you. So these are the 10 last-minute virtual teaching and learning considerations. So make sure that Zoom is updated. I saw briefly earlier someone had mentioned that the annotate features might not have been present, potentially because of an update issue. I think there's actually 5.0.3 now, which is actually the most recent version. These days, Zoom is really updating on a weekly, if not a daily basis. So it's really important to make sure that your Zoom is updated. Consider a dual multiple screen setup as a host. One glitch of Zoom in particular is that if you're sharing a PowerPoint presentation, you can't see your PowerPoint presenter view and share your screen simultaneously if you're working from one screen only. So there's a lot of people have been upset by this because typically when they've given a PowerPoint presentation, they rely a lot on the speaker notes. But this is something that you can't do. But a way around that is to have 2 dual screens. Therefore, you can share the screen on one and read the presenter notes on the other. Practice, practice, practice by yourself, with multiple devices, with family, people that you trust. Small font size is less noticeable. So this is probably a pro in teaching virtually and sharing PowerPoint presentations. Typically, we all know that feeling when we're sitting at the back of the room and someone's presenting a PowerPoint and we can barely read the small font on the bottom right-hand side of the screen. But this is actually a little bit less important when we're teaching through virtual platforms. You can consider using a virtual background. When we did have our videos on a little bit earlier, everybody, I did see that a few of you had a virtual background. So if you're a little bit self-conscious of what's behind you, that's always a consideration. Trust your learner, trust your teacher. The reason why I put this up here is because some individuals in the past have demonstrated maybe a little bit of apprehension towards teaching one-on-one online, because if you're asking a learner a specific question, you don't really know if they're like secretly looking up the answer on Google in the background. There's really no way around this, but I think that, you know, the more that we can trust each other that we're doing this for the learner and the teacher's benefit, the better. And then we talked a little bit about it first about thinking beyond just another presentation. So we don't have time to go through the full gamut of Zoom features today. But if you have further questions in regards to some of the things below there, like spotlight video, recording, how to calculate attendance lists, Zoom can do all that for you. And it can really save people a lot of time. So we'd be happy to answer any questions about that at the very end. So with that said, I will pass it back to you.
Okay, thanks, Jason. So we're going to go into breakout rooms next, a really fun feature, a lot of people's favorite feature. So breakout rooms is one of these things that you can try as a first interactivity, but it does tend to be a little more glitchy. So you might want to use it more with well-formed groups or groups that have been meeting multiple times or more tech savvy. It's great for anything that you would normally use, brainstorming or think, pair, share, or stand up and be counted. Or if you're in a larger group and you want to get shy participants participating, or maybe more ethically charged or contentious issues and you want people talking in smaller groups, or if maybe even if they just don't know their fellow participants all that well. So what we're going to do is we've got some screenshots of how you go about doing it. And then I'm going to do what I did before, which is I'm going to share my screen so you can see from the back end what it looks like. So when you are doing this, you would have a control bar at the top, and you would hit more, and you'd go down to breakout rooms and hit that. And then I'm going to pass it over to Jason to show what it looks like in real time with his teaching with Academic Half Day.
Perfect. Yeah. So you guys can try this on your own time a little bit later as well. But when you try to launch breakout rooms, which we will do in a second, you can split up people in how many ever groups and how many number of people that you want. You can even set these pre-assigned if you know exactly who's going to attend your Zoom meeting in advance, but it is relatively easy to do it on the fly. So here you'll see it's a little bit small. I know I just said that small font is not that important, but here it is actually a little bit small. But essentially we've broken up our group here into junior and senior residents. And you can flip-flop between, as a host, you can go back and forth between the two groups to kind of decide or gauge how much more time you might need in each group. And then if you go to the next slide, Heather, you can have the option of how long you want to set the room for as well. So there is a countdown timer when you end the room. So it just tells people, well, they're going to experience that firsthand in a second, but there's a countdown timer which you can set to 60 seconds, 30 seconds, 15 seconds, however long you want, just as a reminder for people before they come back to the main group.
Okay, so we're going to break you guys out into the breakout rooms. And one of the things with breakout rooms is when you go in, there's no way to share a PowerPoint or share a speaker. So you have to be really explicit, which is what I'm going to do here. When you guys go into your breakout rooms, we want you discussing with each other what strategies you're going to use in your future practice, or what have you learned from this webinar. Okay, so just to reiterate, we want you discussing in your small groups what you've learned today and or what strategies you're going to use in the future. So kind of a commitment piece. So I'm going to go in the back end now and show you what it looks like when I'm setting you guys up for breakout rooms. So again, if anyone has found out how to show the control bar without it being blurry, I would love to know, because I have searched around everywhere. Anyways, you'll see the control bar up there. I'm going to hit on the last one, which is more, and then I'm going to hit breakout rooms. I'll see that it says that box says assign 28 participants into blank rooms. So I can decide how many rooms to put you in. I'm going to put 5 rooms, which tells me that'll give me 5 to 6 participants per room. And I'm going to automatically just assign you guys. I'm not going to, you know, break you up by category, but you can do that just like Jason did with the juniors and seniors. Now, when I hit create rooms, you guys are automatically just poof, like Harry Potter, going to go into breakout rooms. And you'll have 5 minutes to discuss what you learned here or what strategies you're going to use in the future. At the end of the 5 minutes, a little pop-up box will come up and it'll say, do you want to push this button to take you back to the main room, or do nothing and we're going to boot you out in 15 seconds anyhow. And so you'll see when I hit create rooms, I'll see everybody is in rooms here. I can also make sure that I've got facilitators spread out between rooms. So I see that Kataryna's in room 2. I see that Marta's in room 3. Perhaps, Marta, if you feel okay to help facilitate that. And let's see, what else do we have here? Oh, Jason, I don't see you anywhere. Okay, well, for those people who don't have a facilitator in them, if you could assign someone to kind of be the leader of your group. You'll see that I have a drop-down options, and that allows me to say how long do I want these rooms open for. I've hit 5 minutes, and I'm giving you a 15-second timer so that if you don't hit take me back to the main room, it's going to bring you back there anyhow. Okay. You will notice a countdown at the top of how much time you have left. So here we go. I'm going to break you out and you're going to Harry Potter poof. Welcome back, everyone. So you can see it's a little bit jarring when you're given that 15 seconds. You have a little bit of a heads up. You can make that longer if you want. But that's essentially breakout rooms. So it allows you lots of ways to do some smaller group learning within a large group. Okay, so now we want to hear from you guys to give us a little feedback about what you did learn or what you might take away from this. So we're going to launch our last poll here. Okay, so what we want to know is what you've learned or what you might use in the future. So if you could comment on the poll, and we'll give that about a minute. And of course, if something isn't on that list, please type it in chat. And someone was just asking if you can communicate with the host while in the breakout rooms. No, unfortunately. You can use the chat to talk amongst yourself in the breakout rooms, but as soon as you leave, that chat will disappear unless you've saved it. So yeah, that's one of the disadvantages of the breakout rooms. Things you can't. You can see there, some of you might have seen it, I can broadcast a very tiny sentence. So when you did go in the rooms, I put question, please discuss what you've learned. You will have 5 minutes, but that's about all that you can do to broadcast. Okay, I'm going to end the polling now and share the results. So yay, we accomplished what we wanted to, which was having you guys want to use interactive teaching techniques to engage online learners, but a lot of other things that people are interested as well, the co-facilitation, the breakout rooms, the lesson plan, changes for an online environment, using a headset, whiteboard. Okay, great.
Heather?
Yeah.
I'm just going to interrupt you since we still have 10 minutes. There's a question in the chat asking how difficult is it to change up their participation in groups from groups of 2 to 5 over the course of one session. So I think that means over the course of one breakout room session.
Yeah, so it depends on how many people you have. But if you have a small group of people, as the host, I can easily just move around people really quick, move them into different breakout rooms. As long as, you know, that is a little bit jarring though, pulling one person out of group 1 and all of a sudden, boosh, they're in group 5. But you can definitely do that, especially if you give them the heads up that you might automatically just be moving them around from time to time. Okay, great. So we're moving more into the summary and question and answer part of our talk, but these are just a summary of tips and tricks. So we talked about the importance of audio, practicing a lot and having backup plans, but also not being shy to try out new things, and just emulating when you make a mistake, that it's okay. And then your learners are going to feel okay to make a mistake too and try out new things. Co-facilitate if possible, have 2 computers or use your phone. The other thing I forgot to mention is if you have 2 computers and your one computer starts glitching out, it's a lot easier just to switch over to the other one and have someone give you the host status. So it's a nice backup plan as well. I was watching a talk recently, and the presenter said, he was saying this was after years of doing things going wrong online, and he had a water bottle and he said, see, there's a top on it. There's a reason why there's a top on it, because one time it spilled over, ruined my whole computer, left 200 people in the lurch, and I had no computer to go on. So these things do happen. So engage early and often. And when I say early, that's the most important thing. Engage your learners early, otherwise they will start multitasking, or get that netiquette piece in early to say, hey, let's everybody unitask here. Have explicit instructions, allow for more time for content and facilitation. So if you normally have a 1-hour talk, allow for 1.5 hours, and really have a lot of frequent breaks. No more than 1.5 hours. You will lose, you'll lose yourself. It's too much to be concentrating this hard for any longer than 1.5 hours. And consider the amount of people that you have online. So if you're doing PBL, have 5 to 6 people like a PBL. If you're doing a lecture, then you can have hundreds of people like a lecture, but try and emulate the number of people that you would, the style of teaching that you're using, and your lesson plan to how you would in a face-to-face way. These are a few resources if you're interested in using Zoom. They've got some great videos. Lynda.com is actually free, both through Toronto Public Library and U of T, and they have a whole bunch of videos on how to use a whole bunch of software. So it's a great resource. And Karen Hyder teaches a lot in synchronous environment. She has a great website. Just giving a shout out for the course that Kat and I teach, and that we're going to be putting it into an online, a fully online offering. If anyone's interested, the website is there. We also teach a master's course, so if you are in a U of T master's, that it's a different offering, but that's available as well. And there's our objectives. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to unmute their mics or raise their hands and we'll open your mics, or you can type it in the chat room.
So hi, it's Mirak here. I have a question. So when we teach undergrad right now online, we have a pre-assigned already CBL groups, and somebody else sets up the Zoom accounts. Is there a way for me to do these online polls when I go into, or just ahead of time before the session starts?
As far as I know, you have to have them set up before the session starts. Jason, I think you had some experience with that, right?
Yeah, we were in this, Merrick and I were in the same breakout room, so we chatted a little bit about that. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the thing with each of these synchronous technology tools, you're going to find pros and cons. Some of them will do things that you want them to do and not other things that you don't want them to do. So it's just getting comfortable with one and knowing what it's going to do and not going to do. And Zoom, you cannot on the fly put polls. If you want to do something on the fly, especially if you have a co-facilitator, I'd suggest using a back channel, Socrative, Poll Daddy, Poll Everyone, and you know, you can easily do that one on the fly. Okay, so Susan is asking, can I see Heather's presentation at the same time as seeing the other participants? Do you mean the PowerPoint presentation? And Susan, feel free to unmute yourself too if you wanna. Or you can type.
Yeah, no, my unmute just wasn't working now. It's my mute. Anyways,
Perfect.
yeah, so I found that while I was listening to your presentation and seeing your PowerPoint slides, I also wanted to see the other participants.
Yeah.
Is that possible?
Yeah, and you can see that in Jason's screen a while back, we can put it up there. You can have the PowerPoint and then the list, the participants at the side. We have a lot of participants here. They're also up at the top. There's different views you can have. There's speaker view and another view. Jason, do you want to?
So that's as the speaker, but as a participant, can I see the participants and your PowerPoint?
Yeah,
Yeah.
you can.
Because I wasn't able to figure that out. So
I think the issue is there. You just have to go to the top right-hand corner, and it should say either speaker view or gallery view. So if you want to see all the participants, just make sure it's selected to gallery view, and then you should be able to see at least some more people. If you want to see everybody, you can just drag like the division between the video and the PowerPoint screen to the
and
left.
is that and that's as a participant? Because on my iPad, I'm not getting the. I got the gallery view before the PowerPoint. But
oh, you're on an iPad. Yeah.
Yes, but as a participant, I'm not getting that option. So you're saying more likely on a desktop then?
Yes. Sorry, I wasn't aware that you were on an iPad. My bad.
Yeah.
Definitely on a desktop, which I have right here going. We can look that up for you, Susan. I thought it was possible on an iPad too. So maybe we can just, I have an iPad, maybe I can play around with it. Does anyone else in the audience on an iPad that is able to see both the PowerPoint and the participants? Okay, Susan, if you're interested, let me know. I can look that up for you, okay?
Yes, please. I'd appreciate that. Thank you
Great.
very much. By the way, I have to go to a clinic now. I appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Susan. Yeah. We have another 2 minutes left. I'm sure we're going to be losing people soon. So thank you so much, everybody. And make sure you fill out any feedback for us. We still will be on here if people want to stick around and keep asking us questions.
So are you sending us a link to the recording of this? Because I noticed you're recording it, or just the PowerPoint slides. Either would be great.
Yeah, as far as I'm aware, they're recording it and they'll post it. The last one, we did another session similar, and that one is already posted. And I think Marta is recording this one just in case people want this one up as well. And I'll ask her to post both if you guys are interested.
Yeah, and it's on the CPD website?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay, great. Well, thanks you guys. It was great. Lots of great little pearls and tips in there. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks for participating.
Heather, there was a question in the chat about assessments and tests, and I'll also use this opportunity to say bye because I have a meeting right on the dot. But thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Kat. Yeah, so e-assessments, e-tests, that's an entire another topic. But yeah, there's a lot of things that you can do. Obviously, something that if it's a high stakes exam, you have to be very careful because you want to make sure everybody's computer is working right and the internet speed is fast enough, and you don't want anything that could, muddy the waters. So sometimes people will bring people into an assessment center to have that done, and with it being proctored, so that it's pretty hard to make sure somebody's not looking up something in the background. So sometimes you might want to do more of an open book type of exam where you're testing, their application and higher level knowledge. But yeah, there's tons of things written out there about e-assessment. It's a totally different ballgame. We talked about doing OSCEs, especially in this day and age, online OSCEs, and I think that would be really neat. I'd suggest if you are doing any e-assessment right now, make it low stakes first. Get everybody comfortable in the environment, do it as practice before you do anything high stakes. And if you do high stakes, make sure everybody's got plugged into the Ethernet at a minimum and got everything working before anything begins.
Hi, it's Mirek here. We're planning to move the OSCEs online as well, and we're in the strategizing phases. The standardization program here at U of T has run OSCE already, like a virtual OSCE for the naturopath college. So we're going to be using some of their expertise to get some of this. But people are worried about exam content as well being stolen when you do these things, which is another concern from the educators.
Yeah, and I think that's an ongoing debate that occurs. Do you put exam content out there in volumes? And, you know, by putting exam, I mean, learners learn based on what their stimulus is, as we all know. And so if they're being stimulated by getting a good mark on an exam, should we just be putting the content out there knowing that they're actually studying it and getting to know it? Or do we hold everything close just to make sure that they're studying everything? Yeah, there's debates back and forth about that, for sure.
Great. Well, thank you for doing this. This was really good.
Thank you, Mirek. Thanks for all your participation. I appreciate it.
Bye-bye now.
Bye. Just going to check the chat here. Dr. Ahmed Litton said, how can I design the test questions? Is automated grading option available? Sorry, that's just my timer going off. Are you talking, I'm not sure if you're still on, Dr. Litton, but are you talking about the polls that we used? I'd say that the polls really are just more used for interactivity within Zoom. If you're doing something like a high stakes exam, I'd use a different software. Okay, I don't think that there's any other questions unless anyone has any. So I just want to thank everybody for their time, and I think we'll end it there then.